Hey dudes, it's Llarold. Blizzard finished up mythic testing for patch 11.2's upcoming raid, Manaforge Omega, at the end of last week, so this is the right time to talk about it. What I want to do in this video is give a quick perspective on each fight from the tank role, talk a bit about the tank classes going into the next raid, and just kind of give a general overview of the raid as well. So that's the intro. Join our Discord in the description and say hi to me in Sunset. And now to quote from Blizzard's official marketing materials, let's enter the Manaforge. And I think I'll start with a brief overview of the testing experience and the raid itself. So just looking around the raid, getting some chances to kind of bounce around and look at, areas while we're fighting bosses, but also in between boss fights. It's a really cool looking raid. It's extremely purple, one of the most purple raids of all time, but it really is very cool looking. And I think there's a lot of variety of the different boss fights. There's a lot of single target fights. You know, like some of the mechanics of the boss fights are definitely ones that you'll be familiar with if you've been raiding for a while, but they are configured in a way that's kind of new and interesting, and I think I found this to be, just generally speaking, a more interesting raid than either of the two that we've had thus far in this expansion. At least in terms of the testing experience. Now, on the subject of the testing experience, that did not go very smoothly at all. The first day of testing, they had a horrible login issue and had to cancel it, which they did an hour into what was supposed to be the testing time because no one could log in. Then the second day of testing, or the intended second day of testing, went off without any real hitches. Then the replacement for the first day, they restarted the servers at the moment that the testing was supposed to begin, so that wound up taking like an hour or 45 minutes or something to actually get started with testing there, so that got extended. And then the final 2 days of testing, which were mythic bosses, the server was very laggy. The encounters were just causing a lot of problems for people's computers. So, yeah, there were definitely some concerns with the experience there. Although you never know what's people trying to run like unoptimized weak auras or something on a fight. But I definitely had some issues myself with some of the bosses. So, you know, live testing environment, it kind of is what it is. In general, I would say the experience of trying to do 4 bosses in a row on multiple days of testing was like pretty long, pretty lengthy. I definitely prefer the older days where they would kind of break fights up into like 2 or 3 per day instead of trying to ram 4 hours of testing at players. Now, going boss by boss, the first boss is the Plexus Sentinel, and this boss is very reminiscent of Mother from Uldir in Battle for Azeroth, the first raid of Battle for Azeroth, the second boss of that raid. It's sort of like a long hallway boss. This is a very weird first boss. He really feels more like a third boss or something. In terms of the tank mechanic, he gives you like he'll start to light you up for a few seconds, you run out, then you'll explode and do a bunch of fall-off damage to the group, and leave behind like a big nasty pool that slows people and does a bunch of damage. This really is a pretty simple mechanic on its own, and a pretty simple fight on its own, but then there's an extra action button mechanic that interacts with the new cloak that you get in the new zone. Like the whole brand new zone is going to have this quest cloak that will be required to do the raid. It basically just gives you like a little blink forward, and periodically through the fight, he'll throw like walls of death at the raid. And so you have to, when you see that wall coming, you hit the extra action button and you blink through the wall and then you're fine. Where this gets a little bit more complicated is that during the intermissions of the fight, he will shove everybody back toward the entrance of the encounter space, and then you'll have to run through kind of a maze. And you can use the cloak extra action button to like blink through some of the maze components, but he also will throw a wall at you during that time, so you kind of want to do both. You want to blink through the wall and through the maze, and then on some of the higher difficulty levels, you have to also kill ads before he throws the wall at you. So there's actually a lot going on for a first boss, but all told, I didn't think it was like mind-blowingly complex or anything. You know, it was something that we killed in about a half pug raid, so not too complicated. But for a first boss, I thought it was actually quite a lot. The second boss, Lumathar, is sort of a combination of like a moth and a spider. Very weird, ugly purple and white creature. I'm not a fan of the aesthetics of it as a creature. And in terms of the mechanics for the tanks, it's really like a 2-phase fight. The first phase just has one mechanic for the tanks. It's a back-to-back like line that it'll shoot through the tanks. On the lower difficulty levels, normal and LFR, you just don't hit anybody with it, it's fine. But on heroic and mythic, the boss will summon like a sort of a wall of webs that come in to root and kill the group, do a lot of damage, and there'll be like these little nodes around the web that you have to hit with that line from the tank mechanic. On heroic, there's one line, so you just hit one node and then it'll be like attackable. It'll still shoot 2 lines at the tank, so you just hit it with one and then the other tank just doesn't hit anybody with the line and it's fine. On mythic, there are actually like 2 lines or 2 webs back to back that you have to hit, and you have to hit one with one line and one with the next, and that's kind of it for phase 1. Then phase 2 is a lot less complex. It's basically just there's a frontal cone, it has to hit people, and it deals a lot of damage, so the tanks have to alternate who's getting hit by the frontal cone, and also the raid has to alternate who's getting in to soak and split that damage. It seemed like it was something that you could immune with like Spell Warden and Divine Shield, probably Anti-Magic Shell as well, so yeah, not really that much going on in the second phase. Soulbinder and his injury is the third fight, and unlike the other 2, which are pretty much all single target, this is like the classic definition of a hectic ad cleave fight. When you first pull the boss, there will be 12 different NPCs around the room that are all in like stasis chambers. You're not able to attack them. And the boss just does like a very basic taunt swap on the tank. It'll like do this like combo where it hits you 6 times in a row. You just use a basic defensive cooldown. It's pretty easy to live through, and then taunt afterward. Very simple tanking mechanic-wise on that front. Really, the tank mechanic of the fight is more moving the boss around to the different collections of like stasis pods. And the boss will then choose 2 people who it wants to throw a ball at, and those people have to point the balls at the stasis pods, and everyone in the raid has to not soak the balls so that they will hit the stasis pods and make the ads attackable. Once you've gotten, I think, 3 sets of those balls, so 6 ads, the boss will then activate all of the remaining guys that are in stasis pods, so that would be 6 guys that suddenly all spawn and start attacking, and there are 3 different types of mobs. They all seem fairly dangerous in their own different ways, and that's kind of the fight. You gather up those ads and cleave them all down real quickly. Most of them are CCable. I think there's one type of guy that isn't, but I think, as usual, Prop Paladin's ability to blanket AoE, interrupt, I guess the same with Vengeance Demon Hunter to some extent, and then obviously DK's ability to Gorfiend's Grasp is just going to be huge. So I think those 3 tanks are going to be really great for that particular fight. That is like a very messy section of the fight, and then he resummons ads, and then that's kind of it. Ultimately, it was an okay fight. Not the most interesting from a tank perspective, but I did think that the mechanic of having a bunch of ad spawn and like having to deal with a sudden messy hectic ad cleave moment is pretty enjoyable. The 4th boss was Forge Weaver Araz. This is actually the first boss that we tested because the first day of testing wound up being canceled and pushed a week later. And this fight was really fun. It was like really set things off on an amazing first note. I didn't really think it would be all that great going into it. Just looked like a big elemental guy. And the tank mechanic of this fight is he puts a circle on the tank, you run out, it spawns an ad. If the boss and the ad are near each other, they basically take no damage and do like infinite damage. So you have to be split up, right? That all sounds pretty old school, not really all that fun. Running out with a tank mechanic, boring, boo. But then in actually testing it, it wound up being pretty fun. There's a lot of other stuff going on in this fight. People have to set balls. There are 3 different like energy collectors around the room. And you kind of want to position the boss so he's roughly in the middle of all 3 of them, and then people will know people will get targeted by circles. They'll then have to position themselves so that when the balls leave them and go to an energy collector, it will go through the boss, so they're easy to cleave. They get an indicator as to where the balls of energy are going to be going, so they're able to deal with that, but it's all a lot of personal responsibility. And it just wound up being an incredibly fun fight with a really interesting final phase where the boss destroys the energy collectors and then starts sucking everybody toward the wall. There's like a big wall of death that everybody has to run out of. There is an intermission as well that I thought was pretty enjoyable to tank, where there are 2 very dangerous ads, and then the 3 energy collectors start like shooting lines toward the middle of the room, and you have to bounce the ads in and out of the lines to soak them, and you also have to swap the ad back and forth with the other tank, because each ad will start doing more damage the more times it hits you. and if you swap them, then it resets its buffs. So that was a pretty enjoyable experience. I really liked that fight a lot more than I thought I would. And then we have the Soul Hunters, which looked like it was going to be just purely by nature of being a council fight, but also being a 3 Demon Hunter council fight. It looked like it was going to be one of the worst fights of all time. This wound up being one of the most interesting raid testing fights that I think I've ever seen. It was really, really interesting on Heroic. On Mythic, this was one of the fights that caused a lot of performance issues for people in the group that we were testing with, so we didn't really get to see nearly as much in Mythic, unfortunately, but on Heroic, it was really quite good. This is also one of the reasons that I think a lot of people are conjecturing that there is going to be a 3rd Demon Hunter spec added at some point in this coming patch, just by nature of the fact that there are 3 Demon Hunters. One is Vengeance, one is Havoc, and then the other one is a 3rd thing that does, like, ranged shadow damage and debuffs and stuff. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not. Either way, it was really interesting. From a tank perspective, you basically are bouncing a Vengeance Demon Hunter and a Havoc Demon Hunter back and forth between you. The Havoc Demon Hunter will hit you with I-Beam, which pushes you back and does the stacking debuff, and then it will finish that off by hitting you with a Fell Blade for like a lot of damage. So you have to use a defensive cooldown, right? For the other tank, if you're taking the other boss, if you're taking the Vengeance Demon Hunter, it will hit you with a Fracture, which will cause soul fragments to jump out of your body, and other members of the raid have to go pick those up. These 2 mechanics happen at the same time, and the I-Beam line will hit other people if they walk into it, so you kind of have to be balancing where one tank is standing so that their fractured souls will go out and not be in the I-Beam line, and then the other tank is trying to not I-Beam anybody or get pushed out of the arena. And I think ultimately that all winds up being a pretty fun experience to tank. There's a lot of other stuff going on in this fight as well, soaking different lines and mechanics and so on. And on Mythic, it really wound up being quite entertaining. Like there's Sigil of Chains to deal with, just lots of really good stuff in this fight. Fractellus is the 6th boss, and this is influenced by a lot of these kind of big stone elemental boss sitting in the middle of a room. This guy has these very clearly defined lines, and he'll put arrows pointed at players and then throw out like walls of rock, basically, and they will stack up toward the back or from the back of the room toward the front, and you're basically playing Tetris. If he builds 7 walls in a row in a single line, then that will empower him and he'll immediately wipe the raid. He has another mechanic where he will knock people back and break some of the walls, and so you're just trying to balance the combination of those different mechanics where you're throwing walls at lines, but not hitting the raid with them because it applies a pretty nasty dot. So you're trying to split those up, and then also trying to break all of the walls down as well so that they don't build up walls toward him. I thought this fight was like mechanically less interesting, not terrible though, like it's totally a serviceable fight. It does seem to be a very quick enrage though, so I think in practice, I think it could actually wind up being incredibly fun for progression, trying to figure out how to min-max enough damage while still having enough healing to be able to deal with this and having it be tuned very tightly because it is a later fight. So even though maybe mechanically not the most interesting fight in the world, I think it could wind up being a banger just because of the tuning and the like space in the raid and the short time limit, right? Like 4 minutes, if that really is the intended enrage timer, super short. Like that's a very fun idea to just have a super fast race to the finish, and that's what this boss looks like he's going to be. And then the final boss we got to test was Nexus King Saldahar, and this guy is a monster. This guy is seventh boss out of an 8-boss raid, just set up right in the like tank destroying spot. He's very interesting in terms of the way he's structured. He has like I guess 2 phases and then 2 intermissions and then a 3rd phase. Unfortunately, because he was put at the end of a 4-hour day of testing in both days in which he was tested, our group, given that it was like half pugs, was kind of bombed out and depleted by the end of both of those days. So people were like, you know, feeling a little sleepy, feeling a little EP. And yeah, I mean, we didn't get to see all the way to the end of the fight. Of course, you know, they have you testing these fights in about like, you know, like if for Heroic, you're basically testing in LFR gear, and for Mythic, you're testing in like normal gear. And so as far as he is, and it was pretty brutal. He is designed to absolutely destroy tanks as well. Mechanically, the way that he works is he does like a 4-hit combo on the tanks, and you have to taunt at the start of each cast. It won't swap during the cast. You have to start. You basically have to taunt before each cast finishes. And there's a bit of randomness, but it's not totally random, so it does work out such that you just simply taunt each time he casts, and it will appropriately line up the debuffs across the 2 tanks in a way that won't cause any issues. Apparently, like it didn't seem like that initially in testing, but after spending some time going over it, it does seem like you just taunt every time and you're going to be okay. In terms of the 2 casts he uses, he alternates between like a circle slam on the tank that needs to be soaked by the group, and that is a pretty slow cast, pretty easy to get onto the group. And then the other cast is a big frontal cone cleave that hits incredibly hard and knocks you back, and that one is very quick and will absolutely kill people if it is not pointed away, so it's a pretty difficult fight. I would say in general, just looking at a lot of high-level players, you know, people who I know are good and respect, they still like struggled with this fight just in the brief period of time given to test it, just because it is like such an assault on the senses to like very quickly have to face the boss away. And so this really wound up being quite a difficult boss. I think ultimately people will get comfortable with this, but I wouldn't be surprised if, because the frontal cone that he does is so humongous, I wouldn't be surprised if that gets nerfed at some point, or if people complain about it, because it is definitely going to be a hard fight. It is a very cool concept, though. I really like a boss that just shows up and absolutely destroys the tank as the like next to last boss in a raid. I really loved Echo of Nultharion, for example. I really liked Broodkeeper Diurna. Like, those are some fights I can think back on and feel very fond of. And I think that this guy's gonna just slot right in there with that pantheon of penultimate bosses that are incredibly hard and incredibly fun. And then finally, in terms of Dimensius, we didn't get to test him, but judging from the Dungeon Journal, he seems like he's going to be huge and probably pretty enjoyable. All right, now let's wrap up by talking a little bit about tanks as I think they're going to work out in the raid. So I think it looks like Death Knight and Paladin are going to be the best raid tanks once again. There are so many knockbacks that you can prevent with Death's Advance, and I think in particular some of the hardest fights like Nexus King Saldahar have really dangerous knockbacks, so DK being able to prevent that and just remove a lot of difficulty is going to be huge. There are also a lot of debuffs you can ignore with Anti-Magic Shell, Spell Warding, and Divine Shield, so again, that's a big advantage for DK and Paladin. I don't think any of the tanks are bad right now, but DK and Paladin have a huge head start. I do think Demon Hunter is going to be popular as well because it's so great in Mythic Plus, so Mythic Plus Andes will play it in Raid as well. It does work pretty well on some fights like Soulbinder and Nazrindri as well. The Monk changes are pretty underwhelming. It's kind of like seeing an abandoned car with like 4 flat tires, you know, and then washing the windshield and saying, "My work is done." Bear Druid, I think, is going to actually wind up being a sleeper good spec in the upcoming season as well. I think their tier sets are fun for both Raid and Mythic Plus, so I think they'll be able to hold their own defensively. In terms of group utility, that's always an issue, right? But I think DK and Paladin clearly stand head and shoulders above the rest. Warrior, having lost spell block in them with there being some pretty serious damage in the coming raid, I think Warrior's still going to be fun and fine, but I'm thinking like middle of the pack just by losing spell block. That really is like a huge advantage that they have lost, and that's obviously hard to come back from. And that's the preview for raiding in the upcoming patch. It looks like it's going to be a really fun tier. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and join the Skipping Sleep Studio Discord and say hello to me and Sunset if you haven't already. And finally, thank you to all of our channel members. If you want to support us so we can keep making more WoW content, become a channel member as well. Thanks for watching. Bye.